Macin Darrin Smith was born on April the 7th, 1998, to parents Tracy and Darrin Smith. The youngest of 6 children, the family originally resided in Canada. At an early age, his parents noticed he had a slight speech impediment, something they sought therapy for. Although it helped, this did lead Macin to occasionally be bullied at school. Growing up, he was described as a shy boy, someone who was quite reserved and not particularly social. Macin was more interested in watching late-night anime and was also an avid video game player, often spending most of his free time playing on his Xbox. At this point though, socially and intellectually, he was struggling, and in December of 2013 he was doing poorly at school. When his parents noticed his grades were slipping, they took away his Xbox as punishment. This was Macin's love, and angry at his parents, he ran away in the middle of the night, only taking with him a sleeping bag and some food. But due to the cold weather, he returned home after only a few hours. In April 2015, the Smith family moved to St. George, Utah. By all outward appearances, the Smiths appeared to be the typical family. Macin's siblings had grown up and were living productive lives elsewhere, leaving Macin as the youngest sibling, the only one still living at home with Mum and Dad. The decision to move from Canada to St. George was based on a number of factors. The nicer weather was something they hoped would benefit Macin, who often suffered with anxiety and depression. His father Darrin had also found some construction work in the area. Once there, Macin, now a senior, began attending Desert Hills High School. This was a new start for the now much smaller family, but within a matter of months of the move, Macin would disappear. Things started off positive. Upon the move, Macin and his mother became closer, often spending time exploring the town and local parks. They went on hikes and spent evenings relaxing at home, and Macin's grades began to improve at school. In order to encourage him, his parents made a deal with him, where if they continued to do so, then he could watch anime, something Macin loved to watch. At this point, Macin's father was working away, and had been away for the summer and most of the spring. His return home at the end of August seemed to trigger the events leading to Macin's disappearance. On August the 31st, the night before Macin disappeared, Macin wanted to spend the night watching anime. His father, however, seemed to be a little frustrated with the situation. He hoped the move would lead to Macin to change his outlook, perhaps lead him to think about getting a job or making some new friends. That night he wanted to take him out driving. It seemed it was just pushing Macin away, however, and he declined, instead retreating to bed, saying he was feeling unwell. Although unwell, his parents had an inkling he would probably stay up either playing video games or watching anime, so they switched off the internet router. Later that night, his father checked in, and as predicted, Macin was watching anime. His father took his laptop and cell phone as punishment. On the early morning of September the 1st, 2015, Macin's father woke him up for school before heading back to sleep at approximately 7 a.m. Macin was hid in the kitchen prior to leaving for school. This was about 7:30 a.m, and at around 7:40 they heard the garage door closing. The bus stop was a 2-minute walk from his house, which was located between the Mulberry section and his home in the Little Valley area of St. George. Macin never got on the bus and never arrived at school. At 3:15 p.m, the school bus dropped off students at the bus stop. Macin was not amongst them. Once 3:30 came around and his son still hadn't returned home, Darrin began to worry, but was unable to contact Macin due to having confiscated his son's cell phone the night before. Knowing Macin was not the type to not come home immediately, they contacted the school. Upon finding out from the school administrators that he had been absent that day, his mother filed a missing persons report to the St George Police Department shortly before 10 p.m. Still, despite knowing something was probably wrong, he had run away before, albeit for just a couple of hours. So the next day his mother went to Desert Hills High School to pay for Macin's senior class cap, gown and tassel. She hoped perhaps that Macin would have shown up at school that day after blowing off some steam, but that would not be the case. Over the coming hours and days, the family did what it could to locate Macin, contacting the bus company who confirmed Macin didn't board the bus, as well as places Macin would sometimes visit, such as a local church, but none had heard from him. Family who didn't live in the area travelled in to help with the search, and almost immediately they got a break. A few days after his disappearance, numerous tips were called in about a boy matching Macin's description hitchhiking on the side of the road near the exit ramp to Interstate 15, just miles from his house. The boy had been holding a sign about needing a ride to Las Vegas. This lead would be dampened, however, when surveillance footage from surrounding gas stations proved the boy not to be Macin. Other tips came in regarding a boy matching his description in Las Vegas. Some of his family drove down, but again the lead turned up nothing. The family members returned without Macin. It would be on September the 7th, 2015, a week after Macin went missing, that possibly the most crucial lead would come in. A lead that was originally missed. After Macin went missing, his parents had originally searched his room. It was noted that he took no money, no ID, and no clothing. Although his school supplies appeared to have been left behind and hidden, as if to suggest he possibly wanted his parents to think he was going to school that day. Now his mother was searching the room again, and overlooked upon her initial search, his mother found a 3-page handwritten letter in his wallet. Authorities have not released the contents of the note, but it indicated Macin's desire to self-harm and a desire to leave. Further findings would also point in this direction. Upon searching his laptop history, authorities also discovered an old deleted Word document in which Macin talked about how unhappy he was, and again talked about no longer wanting to be around. 5 months after his son's disappearance, Macin's father began facing accusations from the public about his possible involvement, and according to a couple of sites, investigators found discrepancies in the statements they made to the media and authorities. The Desert News reviewed some of the warrants, which openly raised questions about the actions and statements from Macin's parents, including allegations that Macin's parents never called detectives for updates about the case, and they didn't participate in searches for their son. Both his parents undertook polygraph tests, which the police have not revealed the outcome of, although both parents claimed they passed. Macin's father would hit back, saying a lot of people think Macin was doing well until I came home, and then he flipped out. But it wasn't like that, Smith said. Macin was constantly getting worse by going in his room all day, every day. So I was concerned that he was going to. It had to turn around, he said. It wasn't that I am this mean father that was going to come home and set him straight. I was worried about him, that he was falling into the same traps and the same ways that he did back in Canada, and it needed to change. Law enforcement does not think foul play is involved at this point. The disappearance hit all his family hard. In the aftermath of Macin's disappearance, his parents divorced in May of 2018, after more than 30 years of marriage. There was hope that on his 18th birthday, Macin would return, as he would officially be an adult and thus not have to live under his parents' rules. To mark the occasion, Tracy organised an event. However, Macin never made an appearance. Over the years, numerous tips and possible sightings of Macin have been reported across the United States, but none were confirmed or produced any new leads. And despite a reward being offered by the family, the circumstances of his disappearance remain unclear. And as of 2024, Macin Smith remains missing and his case unsolved.